Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are talking national political news of the day, and we are going to start with the alarming conviction, plea enter of Hunter Biden. Alarming, I guess, to some people. He pled guilty to charges involving telling a lie in order to obtain a gun permit, and to a couple of charges of tax evasion. These are not actually trivial. They're serious crimes. He is apparently not going to get a prison sentence for him, but is probably going to get probation, which is recommended by the Trump-appointed prosecutor. But the Republicans are screaming this is or not actually. Not the Republicans. I need to correct, because actually there are Republicans who are saying this actually is a pretty conventional deal for what's there, at least for a rich white guy. I'm not sure the rest of us would get that deal. I don't know. But I don't know that this is all that unusual for somebody of that influence. Biden is claiming that there was a firewall, that there was no direct influence. Probably doesn't have to be direct influence. They probably are going to treat the son of the president with kid gloves just implicitly, but he is he hasn't been sentenced yet, I don't think, but he's going to. It looks like there is probably just going to be probation, probably some fines. He didn't report income. Specifically, he didn't report, I think, the income that he made from Burisma. I assume he's going to have to pay taxes on that money, and that is a significant amount of money that he will owe the government, plus fines, late fees, and all the rest. He's got it. We know that, so it's not like he can't pay it. He probably should be paying a fine proportionate to his wealth. But we're going to talk about the political influence on this, because McCarthy and all of the oversight heads, I mean, the Republicans really aren't doing a whole lot these days other than investigating Biden, or people associated with him. So they are vowing to continue the investigations, and we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with the investigations later in the segment. But the McCarthy, specifically House Speaker, is calling this a sweetheart deal, and that is the line that is being spread. That is the term of the day. The McConnell's not saying a word about it. Thune, I believe, is saying that it seems appropriate, and I think most Republicans are just not saying much at all about it. But the usual suspects are screaming about it, and apparently some of the committees want to take advantage, of saying, well, now that the FBI investigation of Hunter Biden is over, then you can't use that as an excuse not to turn over certain evidence, and I think they've got a point. At this point. So, Dave, what do you got to say about it?
So thank you for that setup, as always. I would say there's a couple lanes here, as there probably always are. One is that continuum of like the Republican Party kind of beating the drum of Hunter Biden being connected to the president, being connected to nefarious economic activity. So anytime that Hunter Biden's in the spotlight, it allows the mission creep of the politicization of business dealings, international business dealings, and intrigue to sort of pollute the political process. So that's one. That's like sort of the background setting for all of this. I think I just want to clarify a little bit my understanding is that he did plead guilty to 2 misdemeanors of willful failure to pay federal income tax, but that those are taxes that he actually already paid.
Oh,
and that
okay.
A family friend, supposedly it's the guy who's the lawyer who represented the South Park guys, and the Book of Mormon. So he made a windfall through the media. This guy was a friend of the family, and I think it was $2 million he paid in back taxes and penalties and fees. So that's all squared away. He had it like lying over hanging over his head about applying for a firearm during a time period where his autobiography said that he was addicted to a controlled substance. So while he says he was not on a substance when he applied for the firearm permit, this was just one of those things like out there that, there are people that have done jail time for this. I personally know somebody who got caught up in this once before, that a mistake on their gun application resulted in an arrest. So they do pursue these things for people. And I think there's a famous rapper out there whose name escapes me who actually did jail time for something similar. So it's not a small
It's not a
pretrial intervention, I think is what it's called, pretrial diversion agreement, where if he stays clean for X amount of time, that charge will be dropped. So yeah, it's a plea deal. It's sort of a sweetheart deal, but a lot of people get sweetheart deals.
One thing he did do, unlike Trump, everybody's saying, oh, double standard, not everybody, but certain people saying double standards, he cooperated with the prosecution.
Absolutely.
He gave them everything they asked for. Again, this is a big difference here. I talked to a criminal defense attorney friend of mine who said that probably an appropriate sentence would have been 90 days to 6 months in jail, depending on the severity of the crimes. That's, that he should have gotten some jail time for it, just to send a message, because they are, not the crime of the century, but serious crimes and should be taken seriously. And somebody without that type of influence probably would have had to spend some time in jail, probably would have been out in 30 days with good behavior.
And to be fair, an awful lot of people of means avoid jail through deals. And like you said, I think the bigger picture here is this is happening in the context of an ongoing committee investigation. The oversight committee is still continuing to look for another crime. There's another issue out there. So again, this kind of this brings all of the disparate elements together. You got the name Biden, it's like a bingo. You got the name Biden, you got a legal proceeding, and therefore they're going to bring in, and you've got an investigation, and you've got Justice Department plea deal. So all the bingo lines up, and they're gonna talk about it, and there's going to be lots of political hyperbole in the name of it. To a certain extent, it's to point to, look at how unfairly Trump's being treated because of all these other people named Biden who are being treated special. And that's not, there's very little, if anything, there's basically nothing in common here other than like I said, the political aspect of it.
Absolutely. And, we want to talk about where these committees are going. We've talked on this show a bit about Comer's oversight committee. I mean, that seems to be the big one right now. I mean, they brought in Durham today to talk about his report, a lot of arguing back and forth about whether or not it was partisan. The interesting thing is Durham had good things to say about Mueller and Barr right now. So Durham is apparently not a big fan of Trump, but that was he was in the House testifying to basically defend his report. Democrats basically said that hey, if you had anything, why didn't you press any charges? That's you had 3 convictions, you had 3 charges, you got a plea in one, the other 2 went south. You had nothing, or you would have charged, and Republicans really took exception to that, and so there was a little bit of arguing, but it's not going anywhere. That's it. They got Durham. He got his report. He got his testimony, and nobody's going to hear anything about that anymore.
I was just going to say real quick, to add on to what you said, we did talk about the Durham report in a past show. And one of the things that I think is underreported or underappreciated is that he did identify FBI procedural shortcomings. Right. They did admit that they accepted that in fact they were acting out of line, and that they've put new mechanisms. The official position of the FBI is, we've put new policies and oversights in place that we won't act out of line like we did when we pursued Russiagate with Trump.
Yeah, and like they do every time something like this comes up, like back when COINTELPRO came in, they always put in something new. But if Durham really wanted it, he should have recommended that we repeal the acts after 9/11. And the rest, because that's where the abuses happen. But I don't want to raise that again. But I want to get to Comer's committee, because a few weeks ago we talked about his run-in with FBI Director Wray over this paper that they thought was maybe their golden ticket to be able to their whataboutism ticket for Biden. That maybe they had some audio tapes of Biden, Hunter, and Joe Biden discussing bribery in the Ukraine, and apparently 17 of them. Well, apparently this came from a discussion about 3 years ago, which would have been during the 2020 campaign, when Trump was actively looking for something, leaned on Ukraine to come up with some dirt. Apparently, it was Victor. The source was Victor Shokin. Did I say that right?
I think so. I told you the name, and then I forgot already. Let me
Victor Shokin.
You did.
Yeah, who was the prosecutor who was alleged to be corrupt by half of Europe, that Biden helped get fired. We've explained on this show that it's kind of a contradiction to accuse Biden of doing that on behalf of Hunter Biden, because this guy had shut the door on that, the investigation of Burisma, the company that Hunter Biden worked for, or was being paid by, whether or not he worked, and so by getting him fired, Biden was actually taking a chance that the investigation would be reopened, which it kind of was after it made the news later, after Trump put pressure on, and all of a sudden it was in the news that Biden had helped get this guy fired. But the investigation had been pertaining to a bribery allegations, which took place long before Hunter Biden was even involved with the company. So what we have here is this guy claiming he talked to an oligarch who was some high up in Burisma, who claimed that he had 17 audio tapes. So we've got a guy who talked to a guy who said he had the audio tapes, neither of whom can be found, and who've been heard from in 3 years. For all we know, might have been killed in the war. I don't know. It's just, and this is what they're making a big deal of. And the way they implied it is that the FBI was hiding all of this stuff like it existed. And so when they finally got out, Ted Cruz and Comer and all these people, and Grassley got out and are talking to the media, and even Fox News are asking them, so have you heard these tapes? Well, no, we haven't heard them. We want to see if we can find them. And so, well, do they actually exist? Well, we don't know this, and even Fox News is kind of realizing there's nothing here. I mean, this is, this is what's called doubled hearsay of an event that came out after Trump put out word that he's looking for dirt. You got two corrupt people, say one corrupt person saying that another corrupt person says that he's got these magical tapes. That why would these tapes even exist? Why would Joe and Hunter Biden be stupid enough to tape themselves talking about bribery, and then make them available to somebody? No accounting for that. This is what Comer wanted to pursue. I notice he hasn't brought it up. They're not really bringing that up. They're just bringing up that Wray won't provide the document of the Shokin statement, and he backed down on that.
Yeah, so like that document is called an FD 1023 form, and no one really knows what it is, like what's on there. But the idea is that the FBI keeps it private because it's human intel, and you could reveal sources or methods if you publicly release these forms. But I guess the inside baseball here is that the Republican, Team Republican on the Oversight Committee likes to grandstand and say there's a person, the FBI was aware of a person who said that they have proof that, Hunter got this position in a way that was undermined, and that this money flowed, included a kickback to the sitting vice president, that it was bribery somehow. But there's no one's ever heard the tapes, no one's ever read the transcripts. That it's a form saying somebody said they had something, and that's like you said, this is like a step removed. But that said, I think that in Republican circles, it's really popular right now to sort of bash on how the Biden family corporate enterprise has sort of made money on their access and influence, lots and lots of politicians all throughout time, everywhere in the world. You leave office and you make money with your business connections.
What can we say is Hunter Biden was a BS artist who basically convinced this company that he had a lot more influence than he actually had. He got him a 10-minute conversation in an airport. That's what he got him.
And somebody said there was a golf game, and that that depending on it's also he said she said. The point is that I think that's it's grandstanding at best, and it's a distraction most likely for most people.
And you can see how defensive they all got. I mean, Comer, MSNBC is making fun of me when I point out that we can't find the witnesses. Anyway, we're going to have to move on, but that's where we're at. They're investigating, and they want something to counterbalance what we're going to talk about in the next segment.
I think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
All right, we're coming back to the Trump indictment. Maybe the news will slow down for a while after this. I don't know. A trial date has been set. Nobody expects it to actually go, but it's set for August because the Jack Smith, the prosecutor, there was a discussion about why he didn't push for bail. Or even to have them booked or anything like that. And the consensus in the legal community is that he doesn't want any distracting fights. He doesn't want this to get bogged down in, pretrial stuff. He wants to move this along, perhaps even get this thing tried by the end of the year. That would be pushing it, so basically, it's set for trial. Trump is going to try to get it delayed. I don't think the Republican Party wants to get it delayed. I mean, to have it delayed into later, because I think they would rather have it happen early so that if there is a conviction, they have some time to get another candidate in there, right? It's just, and the Democrats have been dead silent on it. I do want to, that's really the only news so far that's going on in the courts. The Republicans, of course, are saying that this is weaponization. We've talked about that, and they are doubling down on that. And there's been a little bit of criticism of the Democrats' silence. I actually think that it's responsible for the Democrats to stay silent, but there is a criticism that they're letting the Republicans have the narrative. And there is a Quinnipiac University survey poll that suggests there may be something to that. And I want to dissect this poll a little bit, but I'm going to turn it over to you. But I want to give some highlights of it. It says that the poll found that 62% of the respondents said that the DOJ's case against the former president is mainly motivated by politics, while 34% said that the federal charges are mainly motivated by law. But there's a caveat. 51% of those people believe that the charges should be pressed. So there's an overlap there of people who either believe that it's primarily motivated or they don't have an opinion as to that, who believe he should be prosecuted. And I looked at it and I saw by age group, 67% of respondents who are between 18 and 34 years of age said that it's mainly politically motivated. Well, that's not the group that supports Trump, right? So I think there's a little bit of youth cynicism in there in the system. They probably believe, yeah, it's politically motivated, but yeah, he's probably guilty, right? You know, that normally because he's so privileged, he wouldn't be charged. Because none of these people are ever charged. But in this case, it's in somebody's interest within the power elites to have him charged, and so he's being charged. It's I think, very complicated in there because among the elders they're saying it's mostly law, and the elderly people there. Now Quinnipiac also has for the past couple of years their polls trend conservative, more conservative than other polls. They're not a conservative outfit. They're not a Republican outfit. It's just whatever their methodology is in terms of their selection. But they tend to be conservative. However, I went straight to the poll, and the same polls, I'll get the specific numbers later, overwhelmingly believe that the Supreme Court is heavily partisan. And so I don't know that this is a conservative sample. It's a very interesting breakdown. It could just be a very cynical public out there, even though that they don't have who supports Trump and who don't. But I know that a good portion of those 67% of the youth vote don't support Trump. I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'll come back with a little bit more about the poll, which I find fascinating.
I mean, I totally agree with you that I think the polling is complicated and fascinating, and like diving into that is not something that I've done yet, so it's hard for me to comment on. But I think it makes sense given the sort of the Venn diagram that it points out. On one hand, this is being called for Trump a self-inflicted wound, that he was asked for something that they knew he had. He took steps to try to not oblige. He talked to his own people about not obliging. He did a half measure to respond. Had a lawyer say he fully responded. So it's almost like he created the conditions where he backed into a crime of omission by not fully responding when he said that he did, but then denying saying publicly rather that he did do what he did. He basically is out there saying, well, I kept them because they're mine, and yeah, maybe they were in there, maybe the things were in there, but I just didn't want to review it yet. I wanted to review it on my own time. So there was a path for him. Like, he sort of bumbled his way into facing potentially 500 years in prison. So two things I think are worth important pointing out here. One, the scope of the charges, while he is facing 37 counts, appears to be an open and shut case based on the fact that number one, he admitted that he did it, and number two, they've got an extensive amount of evidence, and of course, everybody needs to, have their day in court. But
Evan Corcoran being a really key witness here.
Yes, his own lawyer. So that's a key part of the legal. I thought my thought was we'll go into some of the legal aspects near the end of this segment. But in terms of these overlapping diagrams, one is that well, yeah, he did do it. He kind of said he did it. Everybody knows he does it. The defense is, well, this is a politicization of the legal system. And then but the other overlapping element here is you'd said Democrats are being quiet or relatively quiet about it. Fox News has sort of dropped like in half almost their viewership. MSNBC is blowing up, and that's because they stuck to their bread and butter of covering Trump pretty much as a full-time vocation. There's been relentless airtime spent with former prosecutors, former federal attorneys making the case that Trump conspired to violate orders and he lied about his compliance, and they just talk about it day in and day out. I'm sure that there's a lot of folks out there who are thinking, yes, this is highly political. Clearly, they want to push him out of the box. And in fact, Rachel Maddow said it herself. Well, what if they could come to some plea agreement that maybe he say, I won't run for office? So that's sort of the quiet part out loud. But then the other piece of this is even Fox, like Bret Baier, he did an interview with Bret Baier the other day, Trump did, where he just, his word salad kind of more self-incrimination, more, how does somebody say he's not guilty based on the fact that he says he is himself, right? So we could talk about the legal defense and the specifics of the case, but I'll go back to you if you want to talk a little bit more about the polling, because it is interesting how people are perceiving this.
Well, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but 51% believe that Trump should be prosecuted. So if you take the 34% that's not, that's at least 17% of people who believe that it's political, but also believe that he's probably guilty. I mean, that's a lot of people that believe both of it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, for all we know, there might even be some people who are 34% who don't think it should be prosecuted, who also believe he was guilty, but just think it's not worth prosecuting. It said 91% thinks that if he showed really, military secrets to somebody who was not authorized to see it, that it's serious. It's very interesting. I'm on the wrong page here. I wanted to get to the Supreme Court. Same sampling of people. Has the Supreme Court with a 29% approval rating, 58% negative disapproval rating. So this is I've been saying QPAC has been trending conservative. I'm not so sure that's this one, but again, it's complicated because I think there are MAGA people out there who don't like the Supreme Court just because they don't like any part of the system other than Donald Trump, right? And the Supreme Court hasn't done everything Trump likes, so it's hard to say. And it does say that 68% of the people say that political divisions in the United States make them worry a lot about the nation's future. So that might also be a factor in what they believe about the prosecution. Like, maybe he's guilty, but maybe we should give it a pass. And maybe, we should set politics aside. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I also think that this is early in the case. I think as this case evolves, it also said a third of all the people have read the complaint. I don't believe that. I think that I believe that they've read accounts of the complaint. I don't believe that that many people have read the complaint, but I think they're going to say that because they want to sound informed.
Yeah.
So it's so that's all I want to say on that. I did learn that the portions I read last week were Evan Corcoran. He is attorney number one, and people are wondering how did comments on the attorney. Where's attorney-client privilege? When an attorney is being asked to commit a crime, being pressed, that is an exception to attorney-client privilege in certain circumstances. when it's all being party to a crime, not when you're admitting a crime, but when you're trying to draw the attorney into a crime, and putting pressure to that effect. That is one of the few exceptions. And there's talks about who is the mole that might have put this, that the FBI put pressure onto Corcoran to do this, and maybe even made a deal with them. Today, there's word that the Trump team thinks it might have been Mark Meadows, who also might be making a deal. It's really fascinating how this is playing out. But for some reason, Trump keeps insisting that the reason he didn't want to give the boxes back is he had personal effects in there, his shoes and socks or whatever. Nobody's going to buy that he had it for what was it, 15 months or whatever. I don't know how long. And still couldn't, during that time, get his shoes and socks out of the boxes that were stacked up in the shower and near his toilet and everything like that. That's just, that's not going to fly. He is a really tough client to have. That's why he's having a hard time finding counsel, because he just keeps incriminating himself. And that makes it real hard. People are like saying, well, maybe they'll go in for the glory. I mean, look at OJ. They got OJ. OJ cooperated with his attorneys. He shut the F up and stayed shut up. That's how they were able to thread the needle with the reasonable doubt when two of the main prosecution witnesses perjured themselves on the stand. He just didn't talk. But Trump, he's just going to keep talking.
Yeah, I'm glad that you segued to me on that note, because that's really what so much of this is about. Not to highlight any one particular interview, but that interview that he just did most recently, he said 3 different versions of the story in the same interview. He's just got an arrogance or a confidence, maybe depending different side of the coin, but he'll just say, like, the world is the way I want it to be, and this is why. And each day, whatever comes to mind, he says. And his lawyers got to clean up the mess. And in this case, their best defense, I think, despite how open and shut it all seems, is just to throw the kitchen sink at the delays until people are speculating that they'd like to delay all the way up into the election, and that if he does become president, he could shake up the DOJ and somehow get a better treatment as president. He would have a 4-year delay as president, and then he'd probably be able to weather this and have it pushed aside in some fashion. But in the meantime, what does that mean? How's that going to happen? Well, his spokesperson, Alina Habba, she's an attorney whose full-time job now is to just speak about the case from Trump's perspective. She's not a criminal attorney, but I heard her say they're going to use all avenues available. They're going to try to get it dismissed, a motion of summary judgment, just to have the whole thing dismissed. They're going to fight all the way, conceivably all the way to the Supreme Court. They'll first appeal to the 11th Circuit. They have the opportunity to go to the 11th Circuit on issues like the attorney-client privilege that's apparently going to have been broken in the name of Trump soliciting a crime. But they're going to make the case that all Trump's saying was, look, can I just do this? Can't we just do that? And like, if he didn't even know it was a crime, and then therefore he was trying to get his imprecision in language is what resulted in the attorneys kind of freaking out and saying, what is he even asking for? Why doesn't he just give the like there was an internal strife that this new legal team is going to try to say was non-criminal, therefore that those notes shouldn't have been used, and that would take away a big chunk of the prosecutor's case. But there's a lot left remaining. And so who knows if he's going to be able to delay long enough. There is another thing worth mentioning. I know we don't have a lot of time left on this topic, but Judge Eileen Cannon, who did get the case assigned to her, in quotes, I've seen it in several places, that her impartiality might reasonably be questioned. And not just that. New York Times did a real hit piece on her, talking about how she has very limited experience. She's never been a judge before Trump appointed her. No prior criminal trial experience. Since she's been appointed, she's had 224 cases assigned, only 4 went to trial. The rest were all plea bargained out. And so she's only been a judge on the stand at trial for 14 days total, and that the circus of Trump and his lawyers may be able to run over her. And if she's already partial to their goals, that it could just be a real she could make it possible for him to delay indefinitely.
She got her clock rung by the appellate courts earlier, though. They're watching her. Supposedly Jack Smith has a whole game plan for that. We'll see.
Yeah, she could be replaced ultimately too.
All right. Well, we'll be coming back to this topic. It's not going away anytime soon.
Chants echoed throughout the Kentucky House chamber Wednesday. All his representatives voted on what opponents say is an extreme anti-trans bill.
We'll ask for order in the gallery.
This is hate legislation.
What you're watching right now is democracy. Yes, these people may be breaking a House rule to not speak in the gallery, but we've just broken all of our own rules by limiting debate on what is the quintessential issue for this session.
And you won't.
This is not about anti-trans sentiment at all.
And we need to realize we're driving children to a lifetime of irreversible damage.
To say this is a bill protecting children is completely disingenuous.
Last topic. There have been a number of bans in what we'll call red states, conservative states, against children having what is referred to as transgender medical care or transition-related medical care. It is passed in just about every southern state, a few Midwestern states, and parents have sued, saying this is a violation of not only their children's rights, but about their parental rights to make medical decisions for their children. And in these lawsuits, they are arguing not only that this is their right, but that these laws go against medical science, and they are bringing in experts from all over the place to say that these are that this is treatment is not just a matter of politics, but this is the reality that these identities are not lifestyle choices or confusion, or at least for the most part, and that there are rigorous ways of trying to determine what is confusion and what is not, and that ultimately, ironically, the Conservative Party that wants to keep government out of parental decision making, they want to override the parents' decisions and the relationships with the physicians. Well, in Arkansas, it's been the laws have actually been blocked temporarily in several states: Alabama, Florida, and Indiana. Oklahoma has actually voluntarily agreed to postpone enforcement of its law pending the outcome of the litigation there, because the litigants, the plaintiffs, are bringing in experts, and they are making real strong cases, because when you take it out of the screaming on social media and you get down to the science, they're having a hard time making their cases in actual court. And in Arkansas, federal judge, U.S. District James Moody Jr. of the Eastern District of Arkansas overturned and permanently blocked the law from taking effect, writing that it violates the First Amendment and the equal protection and due process clauses of the 14th Amendment. Says rather than protecting children or safeguarding medical ethics, the evidence showed that prohibiting medical care, that the prohibited medical care improves the mental health and well-being of patients, and that by prohibiting it, the state undermined the interest it claims to be advancing. This is what they're facing. It's one thing to pander to people, to the ignorance that is out there, but this is the actual first ban. Now, what is the Supreme Court going to do with this? I don't know. It's going to be real hard for them to argue on a constitutional basis, I'll get into that a little more later. But and this is as we're the politics are really taking off. We've got threats of violence constantly as people are being intimidated, even in our local. We've talked about it locally here. I think the latest is we've had Budweiser beer threatened with a boycott. The interesting thing is Bud Light, for the first time ever, has fallen from the number one position. Although my understanding is that the beer that replaced it is in the number one position is owned by the same company. So it's just kind of go woke, go broke is kind of hardly doesn't work against corporate America. It looks like the latest is. Kellogg's is facing a boycott because Tony the Tiger had a photo op with Dylan Mulvaney, a transgender influencer, and so Kellogg's. I'm wishing that the right wingers would boycott a product that I actually want to buy one of these times. I mean, it's really hard. I don't really like Budweiser, and I don't like Frosted Flakes. I mean, I think most of the cereals Kellogg sells are like diabetes bowls full of diabetes. But this is what's happening. They are now facing a boycott. But when you're getting into a court of law and evidence is presented, it looks like they're having a hard time, even in these southern district courts. So far, I don't think they've had a win. And I'll let you comment on that, and then I'd like to get into some discussions about what the Supreme Court will do if they are actually original intent textualists. We'll see.
Yeah. So thank you for that setup, and it's robust. And I think I wish it wasn't the case, but so much of what we talk about is like a tale of two cities, how there's a political culture, culture wars, and the battle lines are pretty distinct and obvious. On the one hand, the Biden administration has put in several different layers of protections against discrimination. Number one, he categorically stated that these state actions put children's lives at risk. It's a known fact, medical science, that half of it's between a quarter and a half, depending on the study. So I'm not going to quote a specific number, but
right.
These kids actually commit suicide or attempt suicide rather. So it's whether it's 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 2, depending on the group, we're talking a massive amount of mental anguish that these kids go through regardless. And this is before the states were making them, ground zero in the culture war. But when in fact the medical community is near uniformity, gender affirming care, which is things like puberty suppressors or hormone therapy, are now, evidence-based research fully supports that as medical best practice, like hard
reduces the suicide. Reduces
absolutely.
The suicide, the very suicide rates that the transphobes, I'm just going to call them that, is used to justify their opposition, saying they should be receiving mental health treatment. They are. That's what they're receiving. But anyway.
Exactly. No, it's true. And so and lastly, at the federal level, gender dysphoria, which is a very, very small number of people, that is now qualified as a disability. So while transgender folks aren't a protected class currently in terms of the Supreme Court's analysis of what's going to come next, there is a subset of the population that is. So again, most major U.S. medical associations in pediatrics, endocrinology, psychiatry, psychology, and that's just the big categories. There's, we're talking dozens and dozens of professional associations have all issued statements recognizing both the medical necessity and appropriateness of gender affirming care for youth. Noting typically the harmful effects of not giving them those services. So it's literally causing a harm for the people, like you said, in the judge's decision, for the folks they claim to be trying to protect. One thing I think is worth mentioning too, I watched a few shows over the last couple of days about this. And one of the things that came out was a medical professional from Yale, and she said so much of the vitriol, so much of the sort of hate speech involved, and maybe just the ignorance. Let's dial it back. So much of the ignorance comes from people being fearful of some permanent intervention, some permanent harm to the children. Nobody under 18 is getting surgery. Right. What they're doing is they're buying them time to sort out their individual path to thrive in life. But
they do get the hormonal therapy.
Yes, to suppress,
right. And the claim is that could cause permanent injury, but
which is not based in science, because they have they've been using those drugs for many years, because some people have what's called oh my god, I forgot the exact word, but it's like an accelerated rate of development. And so if you're really, really young and you're developing way too early, these drugs have a track record of being successful and healthy. So she just debunked this professor, scientist. She just debunked so much of the ignorance. But one thing I want to mention too is, like I said about battle lines here, a Kaiser Family Foundation study that was done in 2022, one of the footnotes in there was that, like, look, we have 20 states who have supported the findings of the medical community and incorporated that into their practices, like California. We also have about 20 states that have moved to advance the culture war political agenda. So the question that's going to face the Supreme Court is, are we going to do an evidence-based analysis of the policies that are put forth by these state legislatures? And are we going to say, actually, they're unfounded culture war harms to children, which is what I think is going to be the ultimate direction. And we could talk about how that's going to manifest
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, the Supreme Court will have to decide three things here. I mean, the 14th Amendment is two-pronged here. You've got the Equal Protection Clause, and they probably won't address that because they don't want to declare transgender people a suspect class. They're going to avoid that.
Which they don't have to do, though. I mean,
they don't have to. No.
Yeah. They could just say it's discriminated treatment arising from animus, dislike, or irrational fear. It doesn't have to be a protected class to tripwire equal protection.
Or they could even just say it's a due process violation. They're entitled to their medical care. It's a privilege that's they're being deprived of. They don't have to even rule on equal protection. They've got other bases for it. And in order for them to override the lower court decisions based on the evidence, they would have to find that the lower courts abused their discretion. You can't just say, "Oh, we disagree with the lower courts." They have to actually say that the lower courts were so wrong in that. They're not supposed to second guess the lower courts on the evidence unless it's absolutely irrational what the lower courts did. And so they can't. That's rare that happens. That is almost rare. So there would have to be some point of law that the lower courts did, and I just don't see it if the conservatives are going to be consistent with their own philosophies, with their own legal philosophies. I think that these bans are going to hold up, and even though these other cases haven't formally banned them yet, the temporary blocks, quote unquote, you don't give an injunction unless one of the things you have to prove in most states before you get a preliminary injunction is a substantial probability of prevailing on the merits. So there is an initial proof. It may involve testimony. Some states allow just affidavits, but you've got to have something substantial, which means extensive affidavits from doctors and the rest, compared to the opposition. And it is so weighed so heavily that the people that are trying to justify the laws are just getting blown out of the water. And this is, so as a matter of law, to a judge who is educated, it's going to be real hard. They're just going to have to ignore the evidence in order to rule against them. They just can't do it. They're just going to have to say science doesn't matter. I know better than science. Right. And And so this is going to be real educational. I think that that they're going to, in the long run, regret having passed these laws.
So I think in preparation for talking to you about this today, I did a little digging in my former legal assistant techniques, and I tried to dig up a couple of examples of things that had happened in the past that might be part of what the Supreme Court might be pointing to in this determination of whether these laws should be struck down as unconstitutional. And one of the things I found was that in 1973, California passed a law to make being a drug addict, a narcotics drug addict, illegal. And that was struck down by the Supreme Court. So Justice Brennan wrote in 1973, and this is a quote, "If the constitutional conception of the equal protection of laws means anything, it must at the very least mean that a bare congressional desire to harm a politically unpopular group cannot constitute a legitimate government interest." So that's part of the grounds here, is that it's not, the government doesn't have the right, so to speak, to intervene in what is a personal medical process, conversation and the life path of a child. That's between the parents and the children, unless there's a compelling government interest to intervene.
Well, the compelling government interest is we're trying to prevent the mutilation of children, but of course that's not happening. But that's what the rhetoric.
So just to be clear, there are only 200 people a year in America that get a surgery for their gender issues that they face, their decision to be, to change their life in that direction. 200 people total, none of which are children. So it's never happened. Right. So it's a mythology. And Governor Hutchinson, I got this quote from we're talking about Arkansas law. Asa Hutchinson was governor. He vetoed this law when he was governor.
Right. Yeah.
And he called it the SAFE Act. He called it a vast government overreach that constitutes unjustified legislative interference with physicians and parents as they deal with some of the most complex and sensitive matters involving young people. His bona fides as a conservative Republican are pretty ironclad, right? I mean, This is a guy. He was the governor.
Conservative.
Yeah. He basically said this law is too much. And I'll say one more thing. I know we're sort of running out of time, or we're getting close to it. One issue is that the rules lack any plausible scientific or medical basis at all. So it's this was from a Cornell law extract that I was looking at. So I think the 14th Amendment protection here, protecting the parents, protecting the children, could be enough for the Supreme Court to hang their hat on and uphold the bans on these laws.
We'll find out.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany. The spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Okay, that takes us to predictions. Dave, what do you have?
I'm going to break the trend here, and I'm gonna not go with the topic that we covered today. I'm going to revisit the Ron DeSantis versus Donald Trump fighting that's been going on, confrontation for the nomination Republican candidate for president. DeSantis is out right now bashing the First Step Act, which is, he's calling one of Trump's signature accomplishments the jailbreak bill. Letting people out of jail early, effectively. But this act was not widely praised on a bipartisan basis as a step in the right direction on sentencing and parity in sentencing between criminals of different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it reduces mandatory minimums. It allows accelerated credits for good behavior. And in fact, it actually does work. While the federal prisons are only about 10% of inmates, it did cut the recidivism rate in half. So the normal recidivism rate for people who get out of jail is about 1 in 4 get arrested again. But for people that have been let out under this First Step Act, it's been less than 13%. Worst of all, DeSantis voted in favor of an early version of this bill, which points to him being an opportunist or worse. So my prediction that DeSantis trying to turn something positive into an attack comes across as hypocritical, and voters will likely hold it against him.
His strategy has been Trump is actually a liberal. That's what he's trying to go for. It doesn't seem like it's going to work, and he's falling behind in the polls, even further behind as we speak. Well, my prediction is about a potential labor strike. The Teamsters in UPS have authorized its negotiators to declare a strike. They are negotiating. If they don't have an agreement by the end of the month, they could go on strike. That could have really devastating impacts on the supply chain. Could be as bad, if not worse, than the railroad strike that Biden intervened. But Biden had direct power to intervene with the railroad strike. This is a private company, and he's got no direct power here. I predict that if there is not a resolution by this time, that the strike will either not happen or it'll be short-lived, because Biden is going to have to lean on the management of UPS. UPS workers, UPS strikes, the last two have been very successful because UPS workers, we meet them every day in our offices. We like them. They are popular, and the Teamsters are not the Teamsters of old. They're not as corrupt a union anymore. Probably, they're much more effective. I believe that UPS workers are going to get most of what they want, and I don't think this strike, if it exists, if it happens, is going to last very long, because I think Biden is going to twist the arms behind the scenes of UPS's management. So we'll see. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.